Okay, so I'm actually recording this at work, in between customers, so don't tell on me. But basically, I had these two little old ladies come in earlier today, and one of them was talking to her friend about how she needed to write a complaint letter to TELUS later, because they hadn't sent her like a bill for something for the end of the month. And when she'd called them, they'd basically told her like, oh yeah, it was because of the postal strike. And she was like, that doesn't make any sense because the postal strike didn't happen yet when you should have sent me the letter. And I don't know 100% if they were correct about the timing of the postal strike in relation to the excuses. But what really stood out to me is her friend then said, yeah, I just finally decided that I have to stop writing letters. And the way that she said it, I could tell she was like sad, like she'd been like defeated. And that made me sad because like I don't even know what she was complaining about. It could have been anything. She could be like a horrible human being writing really mean letters. But the fact that she tried, that she cared enough to make a complaint about something, and she clearly was like dedicated to writing letters about stuff that upset her, that's not something most people even bothered doing, and for very good reasons. And she was like, yeah, it's just not worth it. And one of the things that kills me is how apathetic people are towards municipal stuff especially. But I think they come by it honestly because of how like the entire system is set up. So for like context, I'm talking about the Canadian experience. So maybe in your country, the issues are a little bit different, but it's frustrating because people, and it's this thing that really stands out to me is that when I talk about politics, big level, like partisan politics, people are like, oh, I don't want to talk about it. It's just uncomfortable, and I don't like talking about it. And I think that's because it's so hostile, where if you think a certain way and then you run into someone who their way of thinking is also tied up very deeply in their identity and loyalties and the sort of like tribal team atmosphere, it just doesn't feel like you get anywhere. And like for me personally, I have like I don't call it like a debate problem where I really genuinely enjoy debates. It's like watching a sport for me, where there's like better and worse plays. I have like favorite rankings for people who are debaters that like are just shitty debate pros. Like I'd rank Jordan Peterson relatively high because he's like sneaky about his tactics, where he's like impervious to debate because he's being the most bad faith debater I've ever seen, but at least he's smart. Whereas like the lower people on the list, they're more like rhetoric heavy and they just like repeat the same stuff over again. Those people, bad. They're like the lowest of the sports team. And it's more the technique that matters than necessarily like whose team they're on. So I really like it. But unfortunately for me, because unless I like become a debate bro, like unless I start a podcast where I just go around harassing college students, my options for getting to debate are low. Like when I was in college, I used to stop and I'd like debate people with megaphones on the street, which is kind of fun. It's something, and so occasionally what will happen is I'll remember that I have read it and then I'll be scrolling on there. And I'm in like a lot of the really stupid subreddits, like intellectual dark web. Oh my god, I need to stop going on there, but like I really want to, and it's really hard not to. And maybe it's more fun for me because I approach it in a different way, where I see it as an opportunity to like hone a skill set. Like when I come out of a debate, I don't always feel like I did a good job, and that's what's important to me. Like I might analyze it afterwards the same way I would analyze a debate that I watched on YouTube, and I might go, man, I really didn't know that about this specific kind of policy, or man, I didn't really know that was related or how that worked, and I could feel that the argument I was making was weak, or man, I never really thought about that thing to do with how fair or unfair this would be from this specific group's perspective. And then I take that sometimes, and this is usually what happens, is I'll get really into it for like a week or two, and I'll be just going back and forth with random people. But what kills it for me is always you hit a wall where you end up on a topic where it's generally not, I would say, collaborative. You know, like in the old school academic sort of debate, the high level stuff, the quality, okay, the like the NFL or the NHL of debate is like you have a measured discourse with someone where it's collaborative and they have a position and you have a position and you both are essentially testing each other's positions to figure out where your weaknesses are and where the strengths are, and maybe so that you can come back and refine that position. That's like high level. That's like the best quality debates, you know? But then internet debates, it's more like rhetoric based, which is less fun, but it's what I have access to, you know, where a lot of the times it's not necessarily about your position or the other person's position. It's about what information other people who read that exchange later are going to have to say about it. You know, it's why when you're watching something like Jubilee later, it still kind of provides good debate content, because afterwards, instead of leaving something stupid someone said to rest, someone has responded to it, and then that gives people an opportunity to have new information about a topic that they might not have known about, which is very important for like fence sitters or people that aren't sure what they think yet. And it's why, like, I've been saying this a lot lately, I do appreciate that Charlie Kirk went to Cambridge, because a lot of debate bros who spend their time debating college students would not have dared to actually step onto a campus where the college students are relatively well educated. You know, North American education, it's, my understanding, is not really geared towards that sort of an experience. And it was a very real quality difference in how well those debates actually ended up being. And I appreciate that. So in general, you know, I just get kind of like annoyed and tired after a while, because when you're doing like the Reddit level debate, it's generally you hit a point where you have to be like, hey, so you keep moving the goalposts and you keep narrowing your definitions and you're not answering the thing that I'm saying, and it feels like you're not listening to me. And then eventually someone will just go, you're exhausting, I give up. And that never feels like a win to me, you know? Like, it's not that I want people to have a tantrum at the end of the conversation and leave. It's that I would like to feel like something new developed from what you were talking about. And you don't get that a lot of the times, because especially with like big level partisan politics, it's heavily tied up in this sort of like identity, team sport, tribal thing, where it's not just attacking like an idea for people, it's attacking who they are, and that's really uncomfortable and difficult, and it makes people angry, and it's not always easy to listen or to be a good faith debater in that kind of an environment, especially when you're in something as like toxic as like internet dark web or whatever. So that it just, you know, it's bad for my mental health. So I might remember I've read it every couple of months, and then I'll get really into it, and then I feel like, okay, you need to stop, you know, and I'll like wean myself off. I'll be like, okay, we need to stop. So I'll like write a comment and then I'll delete it, and then I'll be like, okay, you need to be done. And then I take like it takes me a couple days, and I wean myself off, and then I'm done. And then I go back and do it later. But the thing that I've been really pushing for lately is focusing on local and municipal politics, because it is one of the few areas in civic participation where you have a real, genuine opportunity to make a difference. Because municipal politics is not, or at least it shouldn't be, but some dumb people have decided we should have political parties being allowed to participate in municipal politics now, because I hate my fucking province. It's not true. I love my province. I hate the people who run it and make it worse. So Anyways, the whole appeal of local politics is that it is nonpartisan. Generally, when you're talking to people in your community and you're talking about community issues, everyone's kind of on the same page. They're like, yeah, we really need affordable housing for employees because our employees keep leaving because they have to commute 30 minutes to get here so I can pay them minimum wage. And it's just not sustainable. And then the employees are like, yeah, I also want that because I'm poor and I'm tired of spending this much on gas money to be able to come to my job that I really like, but I can't afford to live in the community that I service. And it's stuff like that, we need new bike racks in this part of the town. We need a parking lot, we need a Wi-Fi hotspot at the library. Very simple stuff that people are generally like, yeah, I would want that. And that's why I've been pushing so much for people to participate locally. But I also can't be mad at people for not doing it. And I think it's because it's built that way. So this is going to sound a little bit conspiracy, but it's actually just how it works. Here's an example. Petitions. I've talked about petitions before. I think they're wonderful. The issue is that they're also demoralizing. So when you look at House of Commons petitions, at least, you need 500 signatures from people, and then that goes to the House, and they debate it. The problem is, they don't have to do anything. You could have a really fantastic petition. The petition could be signed by 5,000, 10,000 people, half of Canada, and House of Commons could still go, yeah, no, we don't feel like it. The MPs in House are like, yeah, no, this doesn't really align with, what the lobbyists want, so we're not going to do it. And personally for me, it's extra bad, because I'll just sit and I'll sign 100, I will, every single term that new petitions come out, I will sit, I will go through, I will read them all, and then I will sign the ones that I think are good. So my inbox is 100 different confirmations for new petitions I've signed, and pretty much none of them have passed. Not a single one. Some of them are even repeats, okay? That's how bad it is. And yeah, it feels like a waste of time. And then that's not even accounting for obstacles that come up when you want to sign a petition. So for example, with provincial petitions, at least in Alberta, I don't know if this is the same everywhere, you must print off the petition and have people hand sign it. Then you have to mail that petition to, I can't remember which group is the ones that review but you have to mail it to them for them to review it so that they can then consider the petition, which is ridiculous, especially in Alberta when we have so many rural communities where people just might not be there to canvass, right? So if there's a cause I care about for a petition, it's very unlikely I will even see the petition in my town because it is so small, no one is going here to canvass at all. So unless it's something really big, I won't even hear about it. So for example, the first time I ever even saw a physical petition was just a couple months ago, so basically Alberta has a pretty significant wild horse population, and a lot of ranchers and property owners are hey, so all these wild horses are sort of destroying my ranch area or this sort of wildlife area because they're running around doing horse things. So at some point in the before 4 times, our politicians were you know what would be the best way to solve this population problem? And they were oh, let's just shoot all the horses. Just corral all the horses and kill them. Or at least a lot of them. And so basically a lot of people, so it's really weird. There's a horse photographer in my area who's got a cult following. Okay, so people love horses. They love the wild horses. And it's gotten to the point where even the ranchers who are yeah, the wild horse population is a problem, are it would be cool though if instead of just having a bunch of people kill all the horses, we, I don't know, had a board where the board consulted with some experts, and then those experts came up with a more sustainable solution for how we should control the wild horse population, you know, that could be something. We should do that. And that's what the petition is about. So everyone's like mostly on the same page about what this is supposed to be. And that's good. You know, that's why I think the municipal stuff can be so cool, is that generally people are on the same page. They want the same things. They care about the same stuff. But the accessibility to participate isn't really there, right? Unless someone in your community happens to know of this issue and the petition, and they print off the petition and they find somewhere to distribute it where you will then see it, you'll have no idea. There's no way you'll know. There's no way you'll be able to sign it. And then, like I said, if you do happen to come across this petition in the wild and you do sign it and it goes and nothing ever happens, you're going to be like, well, that was a waste of my time. Why would I do that again? And you just kind of give up on it. And then that's not even getting into just the sheer lack of infrastructure. So like on a broad level, on a big politics level, the Canadian media situation is not great. So your options are basically CBC or the 28 outlets that are owned by Post Media, which is American. So that's awesome. You know, it's owned by American hedge funds and American interests. And that means that they cut corners sometimes, where a lot of the times the journalists just have like a template of local news stuff to cover. So they'll go to an event, they'll take some pictures, and they'll do some shitty, basic ass wire filling content that's like, it was a beautiful sunny day in this quaint rural community. And that's all your community gets. That's all the news you get. And then maybe there's like a local paper and they maybe have like a little bit better content, but not by much. You know, it's small. And then maybe somewhere out there in the void, generally in like Toronto or some other city where there's more of a concentration, there might be like an indie Canadian outlet or two that also does the news. But because they're only in those urban centers, no one's covering your community if you're rural, you know? So that also leads to issues where like you just don't know what stuff is happening like all the time. You know, half the time when Canadians find out about something, it's because it's already passed through legislation and is suddenly a bill, or is like on the final stage to becoming a bill, which gives you no time to do anything. So unless you're going to sit around on your computer all day monitoring House of Commons meeting times and watching all of the Parliament floor debates, which who has time for that? They're really boring. You're not going to know anything. And then the few times you do know something, it's because someone like Jordan Peterson started complaining a bill, and you're getting all your information from him because it's very confusing what the bill's about or what it even means. And you don't find out till you're like 10 years later that that wasn't even what the bill was about. He was just lying. So that's awesome. And it doesn't get better on a municipal level. So, for example, I have a coworker, and he's very like apathetic to politics in general. And I was like begging him. I was like, please, just vote, okay? You don't even care. So just like vote in the municipal anyway. Just do it. What do you have to lose if you already aren't invested? And I was even like trying to bribe him. I was like, I will get you muffins, okay? I will be quiet for like 3 days. You won't even hear me. I'll take a vow of silence. That's worth like $15,000, I think, because I talk a lot. And he thought I was being silly. And I was like, no, I'm for real. This is my pitch. I was like, you don't even have to do anything, okay? I will research your division or your ward or whatever the fuck it is, and I will look at all the candidates, and I'll compare all their platforms, and I'll give you like a little presentation. I'll even look into like whether they have scandals or not, and then you can I'll tell you the pros and cons, and then you can pick a guy, and then all you have to do is go, and I'll even tell you where you need to go. And they were like, no, I don't want to do that. This is stupid. And I have other stuff I want to do. But somebody who was like in the store while I was talking about this, she was like, oh, could you do that for me though? Because I have no idea who my candidates are. And I have like maybe 2 weeks to figure that out. And that's the problem. Okay. And you'd think like, oh, maybe that person's just lazy. They are not lazy. Okay. when I did finally do research for my household, because I had a couple people who were going to go and vote, it was stupid hard. So first of all, the only reason I remembered the municipals were coming up is because there's an ad in our community newsletter, which no one reads because it's boring and it's mostly full of boring ads. Most people don't read it. And then I happened to notice it and I put it in my calendar. And then I kept checking for months and months and months to see when the candidates would finally be finalized. And I just was like, I got busy. I had other stuff I had to do. So by the time the candidates had already been finalized, I'd forgotten about it. And then the way that I found out that the candidates are finalized is some guy in my community was handing out like posters and stickers and stuff. And you have to keep in mind, this man, okay, he's like a high-end branding marketing person, all right? Like that's his thing. So it was abnormally high profile as a campaign for municipal, where generally by the time you find out about it, it's because like one guy stuck a sign in front of a place and you're like, oh, who's that guy? Is that a real estate sign? And you squint at it and it says the words re-elect and then some guy's name and you're like, oh, I wonder what we're re-electing him for. Maybe I should look into that. By the time you do, the municipals are over. So that's generally what you're working with. This was an abnormal case. The only reason I even knew what division we were is because I read the local newsletter and I was really confused what division we were because it just says like message from division 1 or whatever. And I had to guess what division I was. And the first time I looked it up and was like, oh, this must be the division I am. I went for months thinking that I was reading the correct updates for my division until one day I just happened to like peek over and I was like, oh, wait, that's my town's name in this person's newsletter. Is that the division I'm supposed to be? Because what'll happen is maybe there's been some changes in how your representatives are done, right? Like maybe they combined some divisions together or separated some into 2 different ones, or maybe you used to be wards and now you're something else. So you might look up the information with all the intention of caring and participating, only to find out that the information you have is out of date. So you think you're Division 3, but you're Division 4, and you had no idea for months and months. So as a result, you don't know what's going on in your division. Awesome. I had already known who the division person was, and I was like, awesome, good, I'll do that. I did all the research. I looked at the candidates. And then, so one of the people that I'd helped prep, and I was like, here's all the information, here's the guys you can vote for. They went to the polling station, and then they came back to see me later, and they're like, yeah, so I was also supposed to vote for, like, an education person, and they weren't even clear what role it was or, like, what it was supposed to be for. They just knew it was for the school, vaguely. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know. Did you figure out, like, what position it was for or anything? They're like, yeah, I have no idea. So I'm researching, and I can't find anything on the school district about it. And finally go to ChatGPT and I'm like, hey, so I know who my division counselor is, but I can't figure out who we're voting for in the school. Because when I went to look for it, I couldn't find anything. So then ChatGPT is like, oh, maybe it's a trustee member. So then I put that keyword in and I finally managed to find something. And then I find out that for the county stuff, we're split into divisions, right? So we're a division. But then for the school stuff, we're split into wards. So then I had to try to figure out what ward we are. I do a bunch of Googling, and I'm like, okay, we must be this ward. I do all the research, I read through all the candidates, and I'm struck by something very interesting. One of the candidates has like 20 years of experience as a social worker, okay? They have real, like, foundational experience with people in situations that are similar to education. It's very clear from the, like, very short bio that basically one of the school newspapers did for them, that they know what they're talking about and they have, like, concrete ideas about what a trustee of a board for an education county should do. And they're like a high quality candidate. And then the other 2 options are like someone who worked in finance, not good for a board that has to do with education because those people are going to prioritize one thing, budget cuts, when, you know, I would want to send my child to a school where the quality of the education was the most important thing. And then another person who has like 0 experience in anything. And so imagine you know that you are in a school district where all the students are like 40 kids to one classroom. The teachers have no aides. they're paying for school supplies out of pocket, and you're like, oh, I don't know who I should vote for. You can't figure out which your ward is for. So you either don't vote at all or you guess, and you end up voting in someone who doesn't fucking know anything. And you just have to hope that they make good decisions on the board because you were really confused and you didn't know who anyone was. That's terrible when it affects like the quality of your child's education. And it's really not even your fault. Like, this was the worst part. I was talking to ChatGPT and I was like, yeah, I went to the county website and I couldn't find anything about the school person. I don't even know what position it is. And ChatGPT was like, oh, maybe check the school county website. And I did that. I didn't even find the candidates right away. The first thing I found is 2 links. One of them said the role of a trustee or whatever the position was. So it's like 5 pages of stuff on how the school's been doing recently. You scroll to the bottom, and it's got like really vague information about what a trustee is. And I was like, well, this doesn't fucking make any sense. So I go to ChatGPT, and I'm like, what does a trustee do on an education board, and what would be like the most important things to consider when voting for one? So I got some information. Then the second link, it says candidate information. So I was like, oh, perhaps this is what I'm looking for. Same 5 pages at the beginning about how the school's doing. I get to the bottom, it's information for the candidates on like the rules for running. So I was like, well, that's no good. So I'm Googling, and finally I put in like some keywords, and I happen to find the page that has like the information for the wards. Now the wards, not labeled with which communities or which wards. So I'm looking at it and I'm trying to figure out, well, which ward is ours? So I have to go on a different page, buried deep on the same website, and there's a PDF. So download that PDF, and that PDF has like a really blurry map with just numbers on it. So I'm like, oh, okay, maybe we're this ward because this is the number that's closest to our town. So I do all the research on the candidates in that ward, and later we're coming back from polling because there was an issue where the person I was helping couldn't go and vote. There was like that's another thing, is that basically we'd gotten there, and because we'd just moved and we hadn't updated our license, there was no way to prove that they lived where they said they lived, even though the address that they had on their ID was in the same town we were also in. So we had to come back a different day when I could send them with someone who could vouch for them to say that, like, yes, they're a resident, they actually live here, because I'm not allowed to do it because I'm not a citizen. So we're walking back, and I see a sign with a name, and that sign wasn't there until that day. I look at the sign, and it's some guy, and I was like, all the representatives that I looked at for the ward were women. So then I go back to the list of wards, and I find out that we're a completely different ward. And I was like, oh, cool. So I didn't even have the right guys. You know, I was all excited. I was like, this lady, she's qualified. She knows. And now I'm like, oh, I have to look up completely different guys. And there's like 4 of them. It's like, why even bother? Why even come back? And, you know, the structural problems don't even end there. So, like, for example, sometimes you might see, like, a sandwich board or something in town. And it might say, open house or ASP meeting. And you aren't even sure what an ASP is. In this case, it's an area structure plan. That kind of stuff basically affects what the county is going to do in the next 10, 15 years about what they're going to prioritize for not just your community, but the entire area. You know, is there going to be a data center that's going to be set up in your town? And the frustrating thing is people go to these open houses or whatever, and the policy has already been decided, because essentially what happens is the county will hire like an expert. The expert will look at data from Statistics Canada or something, and they will make very specific decisions about what should be happening on a local level based off of stuff that's happening on a federal level. And the problem with that is that we have a weak media situation to even begin reporting on stuff. Then most of where these policy ideas come from are think tanks. And think tanks can be better and worse quality, but a lot of the think tanks you will find in Canada are people pulling from Statistics Canada directly, sort of shaping the raw data around their viewpoint or their particular bias lens, you know? The problem with that is that it's not qualitative. It's not on the ground data. Your experience in a rural community or an urban community might be significantly different based off of like historical factors of your area. There's different communities that are right next to where I live that have a completely different economy than us, because they were able to farm there. So their economy is mostly agriculture, where here it was very hard to farm. It was very hard to ranch. So my town is essentially a tourist town, and it's been a tourist town for decades. It's just the way it works. So when the county hires an expert and the county has very little money, and the expert, because they're not getting paid very much, goes to Statistics Canada to then make policy suggestions, by the time the county decides that those policies are going to happen, and then they do the open house to present the policy that they've already decided on, people go to the meeting and they're very upset because they're like, hey, this doesn't reflect what we need at all. This isn't at all our experience here where we live. And then they complain, and the county still does that thing they were going to do anyways, because the county is running off of data that is biased or taken from a very broad level of Canada and not specific to that area. And the people's feedback is minimal, It's of minimal importance. It's like political theater, essentially. It's really no different than the open house stuff that the province is doing right now for separatism, where they keep being like, oh, guys, don't you want to talk about Alberta separatism and how awesome that would be? And everyone's like, no, we would like our schools to be funded. And the Alberta government just goes, oh, what's that? I cut your mic. I didn't hear anything. None for me, no thanks. We totally listen to everything that you say. And that's pretty fucking frustrating. So there are people that, like, they're dedicated, They get angry, they go to these open houses or these feedback sessions, and they put in the time, They put in the time to say, like, hey, I'm a rancher, I live and work in this area, and this doesn't make sense for here. We need this kind of infrastructure, or this thing needs to happen first. Or an environmental group might say, like, hey, we have like a rare population of some kind of bird here, and that's not going to work for our region. But the county's already decided based off of what their expert told them, and their expert decided that off of vaguely bad think tank pieces and raw data that could mean anything, I do like a little bit of journalism now. And one of the things I'm finding is the insights from people who actually live in my area are very consistent about what needs to change and why, how it would work. It's very simple, actually. Just like go out in the world and ask people stuff, and then they'll tell you things. You'll be like, wow, that was so easy. But there's no money to be had in pushing that. So the media's not going to do it. And the county has no money to pay for it. So it's not going to happen, Unless you start a grassroots think tank for your community and you get that in front of the county, they're going to keep operating off of shitty data. What other option do they have? They make no money. And that's shitty. That sucks if you're a business owner. It sucks if you're a rancher or a farmer. It sucks if you just live there, like at all. And that's a huge structural problem that people just have to live with, because no one's fucking doing anything about it. And unless you're going to take time out of your day to build the infrastructure that's not there, people just give up. What else are you going to do? And that's the shit that you're dealing with on a municipal level. So of course, people are like, I'm not going to do that. I don't even know what a division counselor or a trustee does. And I have to go through like 5 different suspicious web pages and download weird PDFs that tell me nothing, and then finally give up and ask ChatGPT. And then I finally find out who the actual guys are because someone put a sign out like yesterday. That's terrible. That's a terrible system. And of course, people are going to look at that and they're going to be like, I don't know, I give up. Because there's no clear information. You have minimal time to respond. The election window for municipal stuff is so short because people don't want to talk a lot about politics. But like, it gives you no time to research anything or know anything, while also forcing you to deal with the most convoluted system imaginable after you've already had your hopes and dreams dashed at the federal level. Because like, I love that we have a multi-party system. I think it's actually very healthy, but we don't have a ranked ballot. And every time someone says that they're going to get rid of first past the post, they do not. Justin Trudeau. And it's frustrating. The thing that makes it good is that when you have multiple parties that can represent people in the same house, it allows multiple voices to be heard. Instead of it just being only this group of people gets to have their voices heard for the next 4 years, it's sort of spread out between all the different people, and that's wonderful. But what happens is people feel forced into strategic voting because they're like, well, I really want to vote like NDP or whatever my local party is, but I really, really don't like that guy, and I know he's popular, and I'm scared that he's going to get in. So they're forced to strategically vote for some other guy that's kind of shitty also, instead of the guy that they like. You know, so you are trying to participate, you're trying to be a good citizen, and your petitions never get read unless it's for a referendum, and then it's stupid hard to even sign the petition or get your hands on the petition in the first place. So like Alberta right now, there's 2 petitions on the go. One is a referendum for Forever Canada, which is talk about separation, because anything our province has been talking about is the Alberta separation thing, which is stupid and nobody wants it. And then the other one is for funding schools, because right now we're in the middle of a teacher strike because there's no funding being put towards things, and it's actually really bad. Like, there's a chart you can look at right now where you can see that the funding for private schools has gone like all the way up, almost identical to the amount that funding for public schools has gone down. And it's a very dramatic difference. They're both very important things, but in order to even canvass for this petition, you have to be a citizen. You have to supervise every single signing for the petition, and that cuts into a lot of possibilities for people who could even canvass with the petition in the first place, because like people have jobs, you know, they have like kids they gotta take to school, they have shit they need to do, so of course they're not sitting around having time to do petitions all week. That's just not reasonable. So the shitty thing though is that you've already gone through the petitions and the disappointment with the federal election and all this other stuff. So by the time something important like these referendum votes, which legally the province actually has to do, people are like, oh, why bother? I just don't feel like it, you know? Nothing else is work. But that's like the time when it matters the most, is because like it actually forces the province to have to do stuff. So like recently I fished these books out of a dumpster behind my word, and a lot of them were psychology based, and one of them it's on crisis intervention, which you wouldn't really think is related, but within the first couple pages I really noticed something interesting, is that the way that they describe a crisis is essentially like people run into a challenge, a problem in their environment, and whatever coping mechanisms they have from before, whether they were good coping mechanisms or bad ones, like talking to family or using drugs, whatever that would be, it doesn't work anymore. And because they don't know what to do, they end up in crisis. And the thing that the book really emphasizes is that to get out of crisis, you need to try at something and succeed. And that's where people run into problems, where what'll happen is you're sort of in what it describes as a disorganized state. You're doing a lot of really different erratic things to try to solve the problem. You know, maybe you're turning to substances. Maybe you're having a big emotional response. Maybe you're going to try to talk to someone or ask for help. If you keep trying different things and you either abandon them too soon, or they stop working, or they just aren't working, eventually you end up in like a state of learned helplessness, where you basically like lose part of your functioning. When you're in a crisis, either you try a bunch of things and you discover a coping mechanism that helps you overcome that challenge, and then the next time you meet another challenge, you're more capable of handling it because you have more coping skills to help build that foundation. But if you keep running into problems that you can't change, and all the coping mechanisms you try don't work, you eventually end up stuck in that state. And you are no longer able to seek out new coping mechanisms. You're not organized enough, essentially, emotionally, to do that. And then I look at how hard it is for people to participate at every level of government in what's happening to them. And I think you're kind of being put in a state of crisis that never ends. And you're being given all these half-baked solutions that are set up to fail. Of course, you're going to give up. At some point, you're just going to be apathetic. You're going to be like, there's nothing I can do. But it's about stuff that affects you. It's about stuff that affects your life. You know, when you're voting for your mayor or whatever, they decide whether people are going to help put money towards transit. You know, if you're voting for people who are going to represent, say, the chamber president, those are people who are in charge of what gets pushed for. If you're a business owner, if you're voting for someone who's on the school board, they're the people that decide where the money goes and what things are going to be prioritized. It matters so much, but because you keep running into all these things and you keep trying to do stuff, you just eventually quit. That makes it worse, long term. Of course we have low municipal voter turnouts. When you've had all these shitty experiences, why would you bother anymore? Of course people don't see the point. And that's what makes it really sad, is because the thing that needs to happen is you need a win, If you want to get out of crisis, you need to get access to a coping mechanism or a tool that helps you. And that's the whole point of crisis intervention, is that you essentially need to step in because the person is too emotionally scattered and disorganized, and they've stopped being able to access help. They either can't ask anymore, or they've given up on asking. And you need to step in with a new resource that they didn't have, but they need to do it themselves also. They need a win so that they can get back on track, because they will have gained a skill. If you do it for them, then they're still helpless and they feel out of control. And that's a big part of how crisis happens. And I look at how frustrated and angry people are in Alberta about everything. All the time. It's terrible because all these people really care. Even people I disagree with, people who are really extreme in one direction. It comes from a real place. It comes from constantly being burned and frustrated and feeling unheard. You're writing letters to your MP or your MLA, and they, especially MLAs, I think they try much harder than the MPs do because they're a lot more accountable to those people. But it feels like there's only so much you can do. So you get angry and there's nothing you do, and it just festers and it gets really ugly because what are you supposed to do with all that frustration? And it's to the point where I'm like, there really only are two solutions. Either people locally among themselves have to grassroots start campaigns to essentially build their own infrastructure. They need to build their own whistleblowers and their own websites and media so that they can follow bills, cover them, and share them. But that needs to be coordinated between a bunch of people so that they can do that. There needs to be someone who is committed to every single municipal election, keeping track of the candidates and writing out profiles and disseminating them and making them available so people can look at them. They need someone who's going to build the infrastructure so that it's clear every single year who you're voting for, where you vote, what that means, how it ties to real events. And that's a lot of work for people that are broke and tired and busy. And that's unfortunate. And then the other option is you have to try to essentially force the province and the government to build the infrastructure, because you are never going to make any progress in any of these areas, whether it's petitions or anything else, if there's never any infrastructure put in place so that you, at minimum, know what's happening from year to year and are able to access those things. If your province is mostly small rural communities who aren't going to necessarily have a canvasser who's going to be dedicated to pulling out those petitions and making them available to people in areas where maybe technology isn't that big of a thing, there needs to be infrastructure there. Either people are grassroots making teams of campaigners and canvassers who are going to go from community to community and do that for you, or the government needs to be doing that. They need to be giving people access and opportunity to participate. And it's the only way, There's not really a third option. And that's just what needs to happen. And it's very, I think, frustrating because it's bare minimum foundational stuff that you need to put in place before anything else can happen. Of course, your petitions aren't going to get read if you can't even get the petitions out to all the people who might be interested in signing and care about those things. Of course, you're going to have a low turnout for things that matter until people feel like they know who they're voting for and why and where to go. That's the bare minimum. I don't know. It's not like we live under a dictatorship, There are people in other countries who are fighting tooth and nail just to be allowed to vote, just to be allowed to have a choice in the government. So it feels kind of like a first world problem to complain about, but I think it's something that matters even more in that context, knowing that there are people, a huge portion of Canadian people, or I guess people that live in Canada, can't vote because they're immigrants or they're PRs, but they are still affected by all of the choices that local elected people make for them. And they don't get a choice. You know, I don't get a choice of who gets to be in those positions because I'm not allowed to vote. I don't get a choice on most petitions because I can't vote on most petitions. There's a lot of options that are closed to me. Even like I've had people say like, oh, you should run, you should campaign at some point. And you know, when I was in high school and I was really dedicated to getting my citizenship, I was very interested in politics. But even then, you know, I looked around and I saw how many politicians looked like me that are hated and have very short runs because there's a bit of a racial bias there, especially presenting female politicians, not very popular. So I knew pretty much from a young age that like me running as a politician was very unlikely to get me anywhere. You know, it's very unlikely that I would be able to do anything. So I get maybe a little bit jealous and a little bit frustrated with people who do have these opportunities. But then I also see how many obstacles are put in their way to prevent them from being able to participate to begin with. And I think it needs to change. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts, especially about municipal politics and the way that it works. And I see how much people care, how little they feel they can do about it. And I don't know. I think if you keep ignoring it, it's just going to bubble over. It's just going to get uglier. So this has been like a short little meditation for you on Canadian municipal politics and the way that structural barriers keep people from being able to participate in stuff that actually they should be allowed to participate in because it affects them. Not very short video. I do hope you enjoyed it though. And I need to go because I've been at work for a while. Okay, bye.